morning, good day, welcome. We know it is at the beginning of the second month, and the day is February 1st, 2026, and you are now in tune to Nation Watch, powered by the People's National Congress. We'd like to take this time to welcome all of our loyal listeners, our viewers, and our supporters back to the program. We have received all your messages. I got all your calls, all of the persons who saw me on the road and asked me when we are starting back. And we are back and we are ready. Allow me to take this time to wish you all the best for the new year. And we wish you nothing but success and that we will prosper through the entirety of this new year. However, with the recent things that have been happening within our country, most importantly of those things is the national 2026 budget. And we are here to dissect and to discuss that issue with you, with none other than our comrade leader, Mr. Aubrey Compton Norton. Good morning, sir. How are you doing today?
Morning, I'm fine, and permit me also to say Happy New Year to all of your listeners and to all Guyanese.
Thank you. When last year you were our last guest, and in this year you are our first guest. So we ended it on a great note, and we're starting it on a great note. And we're not going to waste any time. We're going to get into the meat of our issues today. So, leader, the government has branded this budget 2026 as the putting people first. Now, those of us on this side of the aisles are very familiar with that terminology or that phrase, as it was the theme for 2025 national elections campaign. So, having been able to review the budget, my question to you is that do you feel that the people were truly put first, or this was just a form of political branding?
Let me start by saying this. One of the most critical things in a country is its budget. In fact, in politics, there's a definition of politics that says politics is about the authoritative allocation of resources. Put in simple terms, it means that politics, political power, is used in the form of the budget to allocate resources, and that will decide who gets what. And so while we believe that we were correct in our campaign when we decided the aim is to put people first, when you go through this budget, you will recognize that they only took the name probably for its appeal, but the budget does not reflect an interest in putting people first. In the first case, if you have a budget for the people, you have to decide what are the major problems the people are facing, what you need to do to help them to confront those problems. You also have to have a clear vision of where you want to take the country. And that is why we didn't only say putting people first. We also spoke about a people-centered government. Now, having said that, the first thing that struck me about Budget 2026 is that 50.04% of that budget goes to infrastructure. The question then becomes, how is this infrastructure going to benefit people in a direct way? We know there will be some indirect benefits, better roads, etc. And even that you can't see because a lot of the roads that have been built with our money, they are proven not to be of good quality. But we know there are some indirect benefits. Now, we're not opposed to infrastructural work. What we are opposed to is using infrastructure to fuel corruption. We're opposed to the fact that you are not putting human beings first. You are focusing on steel, sand, cement. Now, let's take a school. If you build a school, money goes to the people who built the school. But the building of the school in itself doesn't tell you about the quality of education that will be delivered. Because you can have beautiful schools, no proper systems, poverty, etc., that militate against education. And so there needs to be a balance between human resource development and infrastructural development. What you see here is the government putting a lot of money into infrastructure. And that infrastructure now becomes the avenue for the transfer of resources to a particular set of people, a set of people we call the family, friends, and favorites of the elite.
Mm-hmm.
So a budget will tell you directly if people will benefit. And when you look at this budget, it is not the people that will benefit. It is those key contractors, those who get a kickback from it, the PPP elite. This budget is aimed at putting money in the hands of those who could facilitate government's corruption. And so I would say from the outset, it is not about putting people first. I sense later we will discuss the things that should have been done to put people first.
Correct. And that was actually the next point, but two things. Firstly, we know that this budget is dubbed as the largest budget, and it's becoming a trend every year they're rolling out. And I think the figures at $1.5 trillion, 1.6 round it off, roughly. Now, is the size of the budget something that the citizens should be impressed with?
No, they shouldn't, because you can have the largest budget. If you don't have the ability to implement the projects, then the largest of the budget doesn't matter. And it is well known that we have an implementation deficit. All the projects are behind time. When you look at this budget, a lot of the infrastructure work is works that are continuing. They are nothing new, really, of consequence. And so the mere fact of the size of the budget doesn't tell you anything except they create the conditions for corruption. Now, I said in our press statement, we compared roads construction in Trinidad and Tobago and in Guyana.
Correct.
And when you do the comparison per kilometer, Guyana spends 43% more than Trinidad to build a similar road. That tells you right away that a large percentage of the money goes to wastage and corruption.
But
not to
leader,
mention incompetence.
Some might say or pose the question or the view that we have to account for the difference in geography and the land and those kind of factors which might be able to account for the disparity between their cost and our cost. What do you say about that?
I would say to that, while it might impact, not to the extent of 43%, and it's not like a case if we are importing sand, we are importing everything. Sand loom here, it has a cost. But I believe in some regard, when it comes to access to a lot of the building materials, there are going to be clear similarities with Trinidad and Tobago and differences. But the differences are not enough, in my opinion, to cause a 43% higher bill in Guyana than in Trinidad. And so one knows full well that it has to do with kickbacks, it has to do with incompetence, and it also has to do with wastage.
And coming out to the general things, and we could take the general answer because we're going to go in more specifically. What are the things that a people-centered or putting people first budget, what should have this budget in 2026 accounted for that we don't see?
The took putting people first, but clearly they didn't. When we articulated our position of putting people first, one of the key things we said is that people must get a livable income. When you look at this budget, there is no pronouncement on the actual amount of money people will get. In fact, I said 9% because in the multi-year agreement they had with GTU, that controversial one, 9% was offered for this year. And so we reasoned that they don't intend to give more than 9%. Now, were you a serious government putting people first, you would have reallocated resources in a way that workers could have gotten more money. We are saying that, look, with approximately $235 billion in waste and corruption, that could have paid workers. It could have given more benefit directly to workers. Mm-hmm. But the government isn't interested in putting the people first. They're interested in workers. What they are interested in is resources for their personal development of themselves, their friends, families, and favorites. So one of the first measures we would have anticipated would have been to give a livable income. Mm-hmm. You also should know you give a meager $5,000 to pensioners. When you yourself said you were going to give 60,000, which we think was inadequate, we were preparing to give 100,000. And the reason behind that is that pensioners cannot live on $4,000 to $6,000, whether we like it or not. And therefore, if you're going to ensure people have livable incomes, pensioners should have gotten a greater increase so that they can live a comfortable life. We said in our documentation, in our manifesto, that our intention was to set up a national schools transportation system that will help you to deal with, first of all, getting children to school. It will reduce the costs on parents in a direct way, and therefore the parent would have had more income. We said that we were going to give an annual school children grant of 124,000, which would have gone directly, and in our plan, we were going to do it in a structured way so that it impacts the school children, like when school is opening, they can get it so it goes directly into helping school children. That for us would have meant putting people first. There is not one word in this budget about transportation for school children. You say you're giving a transportation allowance. I don't know how that is going to work, but this country needs to have a transportation system that allows children to go to school. Now, that will impact people. If you're talking about putting people first, the measures in the budget should have been measures that you could say, oh, that will contribute to the improvement of the lives of the people. Nothing in this budget is pointing to the improvement of the lives of the Guyanese people. And why does numbers don't matter in terms of a large budget? The budget before this was described as the largest budget. Mm-hmm. But that budget and those that preceded saw an increase in poverty from 42% to 50+%. That establishes clearly that the money that is being spent is not impacting the lives of the people. Were you putting people first, there would have been a major section on this in this budget to deal with cost of living. Every child knows that you go to the market, the parents crying. Every elderly big person knows that when they go there, they don't have the resources to even eat a proper meal.
Mm.
And so one would have thought that there would have been clear measures to bring down the cost of living. In our manifesto, I should make another point before I go there. The minister with responsibility for finance went out this way to show us at the global level that inflation was coming down. But at the local level, the prices are going up.
Yeah.
What that says is not imported inflation, might be some amount, but in real terms, the problem is a problem of food in Guyana. And that is why we had proposed to make all the regions agriculturally sustainable. The hinterland communities will continue to pay a high cost. Ashni Singh years ago told a team that I was part of after they killed the 3 young men in Linden, told that when we raised the question of agriculture in Linden, he said no, that region 6, 5, 3, and 2, they have the comparative advantage in agriculture. So what they're doing is perpetuating a system where the strongholds do agriculture and the rest of the country is dependent on them.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to bring down the cost of living, you have to increase the production of goods in this country, particularly the vegetables and fruits, etc. And that will help bring down the cost of living and give people access to more healthy foods, vegetable fruits, etc. And you do not see in the budget any attempt to bring down the cost of living. And worse yet, you're not seeing any attempt to deal with the exorbitant cost of living in the interior communities. And that is worrying.
Indeed. And you mentioned numbers earlier. I have one for you. It is 2.7 billion US. And that is the oil revenues that they have included within this year's budget, including withdrawals. Now, with those figures on the table in relation to what can supplement the government's budget, why do you think that we still have this issue of cost of living? Why is the cost of living, you mentioned it earlier, livable income, with all of this new revenue that the government has access to?
Because the revenue is not being properly utilized. Even when you look at agriculture, the areas that they would have put the money in cannot increase agricultural output and therefore help to bring down the cost of living. For pure political purposes, they like to highlight what they're giving to Gaisuku. But the issue at Gaisuku is not a shortage of money. There are many other issues: the competitiveness of sugar, the incompetence in the management of Gaisuku. If you were pouring money on incompetence, if you're pouring money into a system in which the sugar workers aren't placed first, but the people who benefit the most are the elites, then you cannot claim you are putting people first. What you are doing is putting resources to ensure that you, your friends, your families, and your favorites can access more resources and become rich at the expense of the people of Guyana. And that is a critical issue. Unless we begin to allocate the resources properly. I mentioned in my press statement the exorbitant increase in the food bill, not the food bill for the people of Guyana, for the snacks, etc., for government officials meeting. It's ridiculous. You cannot be spending, I think it's up now to 900 million. Tell me what kind of meetings, etc., they're having to spend $900 million when in the Ministry of Finance, the estimates of the Ministry of Finance, you identify 100 million for poverty reduction. Now, I would have thought that far more money should have been allocated to poverty reduction, and there should have been a structured plan to ensure that those resources meet the people they are intended to meet, and you get the outcomes that you deserve. This government has the tendency, yes, to talk about the largest budget, but they never talk about the deliverables. Is this investment in agriculture resulted in improvement in the lives of the people? And the answer is clearly no. Because if you're doing it every year and poverty is going up, then something is wrong. And so I believe that there's poor allocation of resources, there's too much corruption, incompetence, and wastage, and therefore we will come next year to hear about the biggest budget ever
again,
but not anything on deliverables. We need to have a budget that delivers things to the people. And then when you look at what they're doing, virtually all the new investments are in Berbice. But Linden has the capacity to develop a tile industry. There are all the resources there except cheap electricity. And I know they will make that point. But they are saying cheap electricity is coming by the end of this year. So if you are making that argument, you still will not be able to say why there isn't the development of strategic industries in Region 10 and Linden. And so you see too that it is not just economic allocation for corruption, wastage, etc. It is also being used as a political tool to keep certain communities down, Linden being one of them.
Now, moving over to the point on infrastructure, right? We note, and as you noted, that word is one that reappears more in the budget as opposed to actual putting people first or any people-centered policy adjustment. And when we look at it, we realize that if we compare, right, that there's a 30%, right, of infrastructure spending may be lost or wasted to corruption. And while more money has been allocated towards infrastructure, things such as anti-corruption seem to be more or less mute in the budget. How do we reconcile that?
I anticipated that the budget would have dealt with corruption. And why did I anticipate that? Because the president himself came out and said that they were going to deal with corruption. But I knew it would have been difficult. Corruption has taken on a life of its own. And corruption is linked to the PPP, elite, their family, friends, and favorite. Therefore, for them to attack corruption, they'll be attacking themselves. And so, all the talk about corruption, just that talk. The government cannot deal with corruption. It doesn't have the political will to deal with corruption, because to deal with corruption is really to reduce the income to those persons who they favor. And that is why there's really no focus on corruption. In fact, the government treats corruption as if it is a necessary part of the society. We have arrived at a point where some people are celebrating the fact that they're involved in corrupt deals, you know? And we are seeing in the society that there is the kind of a normalization of lawlessness. Normalization of lawlessness. And that is dangerous.
And then we're looking at a brewing society where, as you said, there's a normalization of lawlessness. And the only thing the average people are going to be taking away at an immediate level is that the tax threshold is increased by 10,000. And with a country that is now recording higher and higher oil revenues, do you think that 10,000 increase in the tax threshold is meaningful to the average Guyanese?
It is meaningless. In fact, a lot of the public servants will already be below the threshold. And therefore, there's no benefit for them, none whatsoever. Most Guyanese workers, both in the private and the public sector, will fall below the threshold. And so increasing it by 10,000 might benefit a very small group. But we had said that you could carry the threshold much further up so that Guyanese benefit. But this is also a manifestation of the fact that the government doesn't put people first. Had it put people first, they would have developed a threshold that would have allowed more people to take away their income. As presently structured, people are going to be taxed, and a very, very small group, a very, very large group that falls under the threshold will benefit nothing because they were already below the threshold. And when you increase it by 10,000, and let's say you give somebody with $100,000 a 10% increase, the salary will go up to $110,000. But that is below the present threshold. What that means is that it wouldn't impact them. So it's really deceitful. It will not impact the lives of the people of Guyana. And even those above, it's insignificant.
And going on to the point of poverty, because it will be tied into the issue of the infrastructure and the issue of income. When we look at the People Focus program, where they have allocated about 9 billion through the Office of the President in relation to financial and economic relief, what are your thoughts of that small fraction of the budget being spent on the actual things that people will feel in real time? What does that say of the government's policy?
That they are not putting people first. Look, this budget, there was scope for the reallocation of resources in a way that the people of Guyana could have benefited, and that it would have impacted many other aspects of life. Let's take the teachers. I don't think anybody will doubt that teachers need far more money. But you know, the government plays games. You go and you give the police a 1 month, and we're not objecting to them giving the police and the joint service a 1 month. But there's no genuineness behind it. Because if you were so sure that the police, the joint services, need the 1 month bonus, what caused you to feel that the public servants don't need it? When you put the two together, if you are really looking after the people, you would have given the joint services it, but you would also give public servants. So it is clear that it is political. They know they are doing a lot of nonsense, and they believe they need to keep the security forces in check. And so it comes over as a form of bribery. Now, if you are genuinely putting people first, yes, you'll give the joint services, but you will also give the public servants who are in need of it.
But they might argue and they might say that, well, we have increased the public servants, not public servants, public assistance to about 25,000. You understand? There, these grants and school children could receive approximately 120,000 over the year. They say, as you noted, the pensioners things has gone up to 46,000, which in their view could be perceived as meaningful outcome. So how do we reconcile our reality?
I don't remember the exact figures we put in the press statement, but when you add it up, you will recognize it is insignificant. If you give 25,000 or 22,000 people $25,000 from you claim a voting population of 600 and something thousand, that is a drop in the sea. I'm using their figures. Now, to talk about public assistance, increased pension, and the areas they identify as helping the vulnerable, you will recognize that it is insignificant. It will not impact the lives of people in a positive way. And when I say that, I mean it will not help them to come out of poverty. And one of the things we have to get over to the Guyanese population, that these short-term things, especially at election, and people bribing at election time, those are short-term things which you might benefit from. But in the long term, it cannot take you out of poverty. It cannot help you give your children a good life. And so one has to be very, very careful and begin a campaign to sensitize people to the fact that all of these things they are talking about, I think, I don't remember the figure, it came up to like 100 billion, something to that effect. But that is insignificant in terms of the resources you have in the country to give to people. In many countries where oil wealth emerge, people tend to get more. This government is not giving enough. And that is responsible for the increase in poverty. Now, the government speaks to a lot of investments. We welcome investment. But just investments doesn't answer the question.
Correct.
It must be investments that bring proper jobs with proper salaries. And then and only then the impact of investment will be felt. There are companies that would have come and they are getting a better salary. But in comparative terms to other countries, it's poor. And so what happens is Guyanese cling to those jobs. I've had cases where people tell me, no, it is not as good, but don't say anything because we can't get a better one anywhere else. So even some who are working in companies that are paying well, they are finding it difficult to make ends meet. And that is why I said, putting people first demands that resources be delivered to get people out of poverty through a living income and others benefits.
And on that same point of poverty, do you believe that this budget, based on your review, do you believe that this budget is tackling poverty or as moving to directly eliminate poverty? Or would you say that it is just managing poverty indefinitely?
It is not an attempt to eliminate poverty. The reduction in taxes on fuel, etc., all of those things are generic, very general. We need to target poverty. Poverty is targeted in a number of areas. One, education. Let's start first with the teachers, delivering to them a livable income. If the home environment isn't comfortable, then the child generally would not succeed. And therefore, we have to tackle housing in a structured way that it brings down, contributes to the bringing down of poverty. Meaning, housing becomes accessible. This government equates a house lot with a house. It makes no sense. We had said we will develop what we called rent-to-own schemes, and that we were going to be involved in building proper houses for the people of Guyana. We had said we were going to give a rent allowance so that while people live in rented homes, they have an allowance to cushion. I met an Amerindian girl who told me that she came from the interior. She's working in Georgetown, but rent eats up a lot of our income. Unless we address those problems in housing, in education. If you go to certain communities in this country, you see and feel the poverty. And that is why we felt if you give 2 hot lunch to children, 2 hot meals to children, then you will impact their lives directly. But knowing the people they would want to give it to, that in itself might be a problem. It has to be done, and the children get value for the money. Not you're cutting the end so that you make money. So food, ensuring people can eat is critical. This budget does not allow a wide cross-section of the society to eat. And here we're not talking about 3 square meals. We're talking about providing them with the basics they need to live. And even that isn't acceptable. So I would say, basically, there is nothing in the budget to deal with poverty. Poverty has to be attacked as a program. We have to target communities, target people who are in poverty, and develop programs to help them out of poverty, including the mindset. Because one of the worst things to happen is you yourself accept poverty and live with that mindset. When I was coming up, we weren't rich. We didn't have money. But we all one thing we had was the belief we can get out of poverty. And that if we take education, it will help us out of poverty. At the same time in this country now, your educational output is declining. It means there are more children coming out of school who cannot rely on education to improve their lives. And so if we don't improve education, we're condemning a lot of young people to poverty. But government will like that. When you have high levels of illiteracy, you can tell people anything and they believe. When you improve education and people can analyze for itself, then it's a totally different ballgame. So in some regard, I believe it is deliberate that they have not come up with a poverty reduction strategy.
And let's look at some more numbers, because we did with the budget, right? And I want you to help the Guyanese people and our viewers interpret this, right? In relation to the public servants, the government in this budget is offering 9%. We promised and we are advocating for 25% increase in salaries. The government has only provided $10,000 increase in the Because We Care cash grant. We were pushing for 120,000. The old age pension went up by 5,000, which is only going to be 46,000 a month from 41,000. And we had 60,000 promised. The president spoke about increasing the one-off grant. Now it still remains at 100,000. Public assistance, as we mentioned earlier, went up from 22,000 to 25,000. We had promised $44,000. dollars, and these are just some of the ones we want to address, and it's a trend, so we don't need to go on to the rest. Now, help the Guyanese people, because you know they're going to be hearing these numbers, they're going to be seeing these figures. Help them understand why there is such a big gap in what the government is currently offering and what we know the country could be able to offer its own citizens.
All right, let's start with the pensioners. 41 and 5 is 46. They're delivering $5,000. The average man out there must know that at the very lowest level, $5,000 wouldn't give you much goods in the market. We talk about electricity, water, and all the others.
Yeah.
We're talking about somebody here who ain't got a car, they ain't got to put gas in the vehicle. Just the average poor person with 2 or 3 children. It will be evident to them that it cannot improve their lives. Let's take the public servant. If they get $10,000 more on their salary, it is not going to impact them positively because prices continue to go up. By the next budget, it don't eat up that 10,000. So in real terms, the government is sloganeering. When you listen to Ashni Singh, he's reading these things as if they are big. What he isn't saying is how is it going to impact their lives so they get out of poverty? And when you look at that situation, you will recognize that these increases are cosmetic and they cannot take people out of poverty. And that is why we argued for a reallocation. Had the government relooked it, identified the key infrastructural projects that we need, including those that will open job opportunities, and pursue them, and take at least 235 billion that will go to corruption, waste, etc., and develop programs to ensure people have their lives improved. $235 billion could do a lot for the Guyanese people generally, but more so the Guyanese poor in particular. And so all these grandiose figures, all these the Guyanese need to do is to take it against their reality. Somebody showed me plantains gone to $300 a pound. Okay? At $300 a pound, and the others increasing, what can $5,000 do? We talk about fruits. I don't think the average Guyanese now could buy the fruits required for them to be healthy. So unless there is a program that is aimed at tackling poverty, the budget doesn't make sense.
No, Tim. Now we're coming down to the end. And my question at this point to you is going to be, if we were presenting this budget, it would be differently, yes. But what would be those things that the average Guyanese, besides some of those policy issues we spoke about earlier, would be able to feel and see in real time within a year from that budget?
Had we been presenting a budget, we had to put people first. All the measures I mentioned would be in the forefront of it. We were of the view, take the Rupununi. When I look at the budget, I look for the solutions to the problems in the Rupununi. And I choose the Rupununi because they have a severe problem. When it rains, they flood. And when it is the dry season, there is no water. Which means that impact the lives of people in that region in a very negative way. If I had seen as part of whatever infrastructure development you had, the building of reservoirs to save water. If I had seen a proper drainage and irrigation program, those would benefit them in a direct way. You give somebody in the interior 5,000 increase on your public assistance, and it's drought, they can't access water. One barrel of water can cost them more than 5,000. Yeah. Let us come here. I mentioned transportation for children, 2 hot meals for children. That will remove the burden on the family. They will still have other things to deal with, but it will remove the burden and create a much better climate for the children to develop. I would have liked to see in this budget a literacy program, a literacy and numeracy program. When you have so many people coming out of school without matriculating, you are actually creating the conditions for failure in the society. When we were in government, we put in place some night schools, which the government closed. Those night schools were targeted. They were aimed at getting the children who the education system was failing back in school so that they can develop. You are talking about digitalization. How are you going to digitalize and you're producing the persons to operate in a digital era? And so a lot of resources should have been placed on helping those the education system would fail so that they can come back mainstream. And when you look and you see a 16-year-old trying to rob a pensioner, it means the society has lost its compassion. And it also means that poverty is pushing people in the wrong direction. I don't condone it, but I acknowledge that it is a societal problem. And it's not that one 16-year-old, that one 13-year-old. It is a cross-section of this age range that the society is depriving of a good life. And that is what has to be addressed. There are many areas, anybody who would have read our manifesto would see we took an integrated approach to dealing with poverty and tackling it at education, tackling it at housing, tackling it at the level of water, ensuring you put the kind of institutions and mechanisms in place to produce young entrepreneurs, etc. The government talks about funding for entrepreneurs. The very budget gives you no details, which regions they're going to, who it is targeting. You can very well end up in a situation where the people who have now access those resources because there are no clear guidelines to say this is targeted at poverty reduction, and therefore these are the people that are entitled. And there is no proper framework for implementation in this budget. You have a set of figures, a set of scattered programs, but no details and no mechanism for implementation and no guarantee of success. In anything you do, they will have a percentage of failure, but you want a high percentage of success. And we're not seeing that. Look, we produced, the government boasted about 12 new hospitals. And every day you could see a problem with them. Forget the physical thing about the roofs falling apart. A hospital is a combination of competent human resource and the relevant equipment. You're not seeing that. I heard all this. I was looking because after I said at the square that there will be a program to deal with people on dialysis, I expected in this budget clearly outlined approach to helping people with dialysis, with kidney problems and need dialysis.
No, this is my second to last question, right? There has been this talk on social media about the budget working in a way of trickle down economics, meaning that okay, you might not see the impact here, but in the long haul, there's a big impact. What do you have to say in regards to that?
In the world, trickle-down economics has failed. In the United States at present, one of the big problems that they're facing is a small percentage of people are extremely wealthy, and at the bottom, a large percentage that isn't. It don't trickle down. Your budget has to have measures and mechanisms to ensure those resources meet the people. You telling us that you do X, Y, and Z and it will impact and trickle down to the people? It doesn't. Show us the country in which trickle-down economics would have worked. All the countries that show progress in terms of a broad development of people are countries that are not focused on trickle-down economics. They are more a kind of a developmental state. If you look at Finland, if you look at Scandinavia, you will see they don't rely on trickle-down economics. They develop measures to ensure resources meet the people of the country. And anybody who waiting for it trickle-down and they're in poverty, they will die in poverty. We need measures that will take people out of poverty, because them at the top and we're nothing to trickle down. And wherever trickle down so small, you can't use it to get out of poverty. That's the reality of that kind of economics.
Now, we stand the benefit of having been exposed and being able to dissect and look at the presentation of the 2026 budget. However, the average citizen may not be so keen on swifting through hundreds of pages of numbers and information. For our supporters, for our audience, if you, Mr. Norton, not as our political leader or as a seasoned politician, but as a citizen, based on the information you had, if you were to put this budget into one sentence, what would that be?
It serves the wealthy, not the poor.
Well, folks, there you have it. The 2026 budget serving the wealthy and not the poor. You were in tune with us here at Nation Watch, and we thank you. And we do hope that you will tune in next time. I'm advised that in the new week, we have a special edition coming up dealing to continue these conversations on the budget. So look out for the updates on all of our pages. For now, I'm Eden Corbin, and it was a pleasure having you.